Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Delmar Chabad Center, and today we're going to talk about more Jewish heroes of America. Recently we talked about Jewish heroes in the Civil War, just to say that there were Jewish people in those times, even though the mass immigration came around the turn of the century. Nevertheless, that there were military heroes even at those earlier times. And in another time, we will talk about other Jewish military heroes of the World War I, World War II, Korea, and the Vietnam War era. The Jewish people participated also. But we're not going to talk about the military aspect, even though that we said there's enough material to talk about. There's enough heroes to talk about a few shows. But we're going to talk about a different area in American life, and that we're going to talk about a little bit about business, commerce, and the arts. We, of course, the Jewish people, of course, have made a big mark in America also. And we're going to we'll get back over 100 years ago. We're back into the 19th century. As shows progressed, we'll try to get into the 20th century up to today, but just again, many Jewish people think that their grandparents came, like I said, the turn of the century, and there really were Jews in the Revolutionary War. There was really Jews in Civil War. We only knew it about 100 years ago, not that early, and there were Jewish people. Not so many, it's true, but again, there weren't that many Americans either at that time. But here we're going to talk about, and many people know this person's name because they're wearing his pants, and that is Levi's pants. And Levi is a good Jewish name, and that was Levi Strauss, the originator of Levi's. And people wear his pants, and Jewish people always know that Levi, or you could say Levine, is a Jewish name, Levinson. Many derivative of the name Levi. It's a biblical name, the third son of Jacob. And we're going to talk about his rise in the business world until even today, over 100 years later, people are still wearing his pants. When the cry was heard, "There's gold in them there hills." In 1849, thousands of people throughout the country left for what they were doing to rush to California to dig for their fortune. Levi Strauss also went into California, but not with a shovel. Instead, he went there with bundles of cloth to sell to tailors. He didn't arrive in California until 1850 because the ship from New York had to travel around Cape Horn to reach San Francisco. While traveling on the ship, he sold practically all of his bundles of cloth to his shipmates. When he landed, he had only a roll of canvas cloth left, which he hoped to sell to a tent maker. When Strauss landed, a miner approached him and asked him if he had any pants to sell. Levi asked him, "Why pants?" It seems that the miners, in digging for gold, found that the rough terrain quickly wore out their pants, which created a shortage in the stores. Being an experienced merchant and not a miner, a thought flashed in Levi's mind. He would take the tough canvas cloth and make this man a pair of pants. He went immediately to a tailor who made the pants for the man to wear. It didn't take long before Levi was overrun with orders for the new trousers. It seemed that the miner had been bragging to his friends about the durability and virtues of Levi's canvas pants. The above story is one of the many versions as to why and how Levi's were first made. The true history was burned up when the 1906 San Francisco earthquake destroyed the records and history the Levi Strauss Company. Meanwhile, Levi wrote to his brothers in New York asking them to ship him more canvas cloth. The demand for canvas cloth pants was growing daily. Everybody wanted Levi's. Strauss gradually started making pants from a durable material called denim, which consisted of cotton threads woven into a twill pattern. Levi was the first to start coloring them dark blue using an indigo dye. One of the problems that many miners had was their pocket seams burst because they would stuff the ore in them. Jacob Davis, a tailor, was buying material from Levi and making pants for the miners. To try to solve the problems of the pockets, Davis riveted them to the denim material. Davis patented the copper riveting process in 1870. Davis had turned out many pairs of pants with riveted pockets before Levi, and he formed a partnership in 1873. Their business grew as word spread throughout the country about the durability of their pants. Cowboys used them because they endured the roughness of the saddle and long rides on horseback. Factory workers used them to protect themselves from the grit and grime. Soon the fashion world made them the in thing to wear. Levi Strauss was born in Bavaria in 1829. His father, Hirsch Levi, was a dry goods salesman who had 4 children by his first wife and 2, Fanny and Levi, by his second wife, Rebecca Hess. After his father died in 1845, they emigrated to the United States in 1847. Strauss never married. He died on September 26, 1902 in San Francisco, leaving millions of dollars to Jewish and non-Jewish organizations. The University of California still has the trust fund that he donated, which awards 28 scholarships annually. Levi Strauss was a philanthropist who will always be remembered for his charity, as well for his fashion world, jeans. Well, it's an interesting story. Many people came from, like you see, as we talked about when we talked about the Jews of the Civil War, that they really did come from Europe, but they did soon enough and speedily made their mark in American life. And talk about immigration to America, and we did say the big immigration came from 1880 to 1920. Of course, the biggest symbol in America is the Statue of Liberty. For the millions of people who did immigrate to the United States, this was their first sign that, yes, they have arrived in the great United States. Now, there's a major poem that most people should know, or you remember that you were taught that, and that was written by a Jewish woman, Emma Lazarus. Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses is part of the New Colossus. A sonnet written by Emma Lazarus that expressed her belief in the United States as the haven of Europe's masses yearning to breathe the fresh air of democracy. The sonnet, written in 1883, is engraved on a memorial plaque that was affixed to the pedestal of the Statue of Liberty in 1903. Emma Lazarus was born on July 22, 1849 in New York City. She was the daughter of Esther and Nathan Lazarus, Sephardic Jews who were wealthy and devoted to the family. Emma Lazarus was educated by private tutors. In her early life, she was very precocious. She composed many poems, and in 1867, in her teen years, she had a volume of poems titled Poems and Translations published. She continued to write poems and essays that attracted the attention of Ralph Waldo Emerson, a leading American poet and essayist. He invited her to spend a week at his home in Concord, Massachusetts. They had a lifelong correspondence. She also corresponded with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Lazarus had a thorough knowledge of Jewish history and literature. She kept herself apart from writing about Jewish themes. Even when her poems and ballads of Heinrich Heine appeared, she considered him in her introduction as more of a German than a Jew. She stopped being a pleasing literature when she read George Eliot's novel Daniel Deronda, which called for a national Jewish revival. Her interest in what was happening to the Jews in the world was further reinforced with the Russian pogroms of 1881-82. Lazarus started to translate the works of Jewish poets. She wrote essays and commentaries attacking and responding to the anti-Semites of the day. The precociousness of her youth was gone, and her maturity as an adult woman came to the fore with her concern for the plight of the immigrants and Jews. She became especially interested in the plight of the Russian Jews as she encountered them on Ward's Island, where they landed from overseas and where she did volunteer work. In her writings, Lazarus set forth her ideas and plans for the rebirth of Jewish life by a national and cultural revival in the United States and in the Holy Land. In 1883, Lazarus went to Europe, where she was acclaimed for her poems and writings. She was at the prime of her life as a writer and as a person when she was stricken with cancer. Lazarus was only 38 years old when she died. She will always be remembered for her work and concern for the huddled masses who came to this country to be free, the interests of Jews, and her poems and essays. So right away we have someone who, in their cultural, felt for the immigrants, for the Jewish people that should come over and did come over in the masses, and she was really the symbol of all immigrations coming to the free democratic world. Well, we're really going from one field to the other, And now we're going to be talking from business to art, if you want to say the poetry, literature. And we're going to go to Jacob Henry Schiff, hero of finance and philanthropy, back into the business world, but now with the big business. Jacob Henry Schiff was an important participant in actively accelerating the rapid industrialization of the United States economy during the late 19th and early 20th century. Through his firm, Kuhn, Loeb and Company, he was able to help finance the development and growth of such corporations as Westinghouse Electric, U.S. Rubber, Armor, and American Telegraph and Telephone and Telegraph, AT&T. Just Kuhn and Loeb is still a firm today. He also served as a director and advisor of numerous insurance companies, banks, and other corporations. Schiff was a prime mover in helping to consolidate and expand the American railroad networks. Schiff was prominent in floating loans for the United States government and for foreign nations. He took great delight in floating a spectacular bond issue of $200 million for Japan to help them in their war with Tsarist Russia in 1904 and 1905. Schiff was angered and infuriated with the anti-Semitic pogroms and policies of the Tsar. Helping Japan fight Russia was one of the methods of striking back at anti-Semitism. Jacob Henry Schiff was born on January 10, 1847 in Frankfurt am Main, Germany. He was the son of Moses and Clara Niederfheim Schiff. He was descendant of a distinguished rabbinical family that could trace his lineage back to 1370. He received a secular and religious education at the Israelite Religionschaft, a local school. At age 18, Schiff emigrated to the United States and became a citizen. He went to work in a brokerage firm in New York, and he later became a partner in Budge, Schiff and Company. He met and fell in love with Theresa Loeb, the daughter of Solomon Loeb, head of the banking firm Kuhn, Loeb and Company. They were married on May 6, 1875, and he entered her father's firm. In 1885, he was named head of the firm because of his financial abilities. Schiff was a strong advocate for the gold standard, and he opposed the Silver Purchase Act of 1890. Despite his success in the financial world, Schiff always felt that he had a special obligation to the Jewish people. He fulfilled the commitment through his philanthropies. Schiff was a Reformed Jew, but he still retained many of the Orthodox habits of his youth. He was especially active in the establishment and development of the Jewish Theological Seminary and the Hebrew Union College. He was a large contributor to the relief programs for the Jewish victims of the Russian Tsar's anti-Semitic pogroms. There was hardly a Jewish organization which was not the recipient of his contributions. His interest and love for Jewish literature found him contributing generously to the Jewish Publication Society. He funded a program for a New English translation of the Bible. He helped to establish the Jewish division in the New York Public Library. Schiff was always concerned about humanity and sickness. He contributed heavily to Montefiore Hospital in New York, where he served as president for 35 years. During those years, he visited the hospital weekly, contributed generously to many Jewish and non-Jewish organizations, which included the Semitic Museum at Harvard University, which still today you can visit, and I have in a few times. It's very interesting. Gave $1 million to Barnard College, and contributed to the American Red Cross, Tuskegee Institute, the Henry Street Settlement, etc. He was one of the founders of the American Jewish Committee. He was active in the Jewish Welfare Board, which ministered to the needs of World War I Jewish soldiers and sailors. He was also active in the Joint Distribution Committee, which helped to relieve the suffering in Europe during the war. Schiff was active in the civic affairs of New York City. He served for many years on the Board of Education. In 1904, he was approached to run as mayor of New York City on the Republican Party ticket. He refused because he didn't want to give up his charitable activities. Jacob Henry Schiff died on September 25, 1920, in his beloved New York City. Through his activities and philanthropies, he left behind a legacy, a man's humanity to man, for all Americans to emulate. Well, I think that's a good idea that people do have the money, and no one's denying that they should have money. If they're good business people and they can make it, then very good, let them make it. But still, a person has to remember, if they are fortunate to be well off, then they still have, I think, an obligation, or at least a moral obligation, at least, to help other people out, and surely people need that. So let them make money and let them help people, and let this be an example to many of the people today. Well, talking about the business side of the coin, I don't know if it's the other side of the coin, but it's labor. And of course, there's the president of the corporations, but of course nothing's going to get done without the people working in them. And of course, they're special also, and they had their own struggles in America. And actually, the leader of the unions, or the beginning, the founder of the unions, was a Jewish person himself. So we're going to look at the labor side of the coin of business, and we're going to look at Samuel Gompers, leader of the American Federation of Labor, or as we know today, AFL. In 1886, the American Federation of Labor was organized. Samuel Gompers, a former cigar maker, was elected to be its president. With the exception of 1 year, he remained in his position until he died in 1924. So you're talking about 40 years. Gompers was the son of Solomon and Sarah Gompers. He was born in a London tenement on January 27th in 1850. Both his parents were originally from Holland. When Gompers was 6 years old, he attended a Jewish free school. At the age of 10, he was taken out of school to become an apprentice shoemaker since his family was struggling to make a living. The family immigrated to New York during the Civil War. Gompers' cigar-making father taught him the trade. At the age of 17, after he became a cigar maker in his own right, he met and married Sophia Julian. He joined the Cigar Makers Union and became very active. In 1877, his union strike collapsed because it had no money or member discipline. Following the strike, Gompers reorganized the cigar makers and remained as president of the union. Lessons were to be learned from the strike. The international officers became supreme over the local unions. The dues were raised to build up a strike fund. Benefits were established for sickness, accident, or unemployment. In 1881, after other unions had emulated the Cigar Makers Union program, the Federation of Organized Trades and Labor Unions of the United States and Canada was formed. Gompers was chairman of the Committee on Constitution. The Federation was reorganized in 1886. It was renamed the American Federation of Labor. Gompers was its first elected president. What made this federation unique was that there could be only one affiliated craft union. Gompers felt that labor could not displace capitalists in the management of business. He was criticized for being vice president of the National Civic Federation, which sought to promote stable labor relations through collective bargaining and personal contact between labor leaders, industrialists, and bankers. In World War I, he supported President Woodrow Wilson's policies and organized a war committee on labor. The committee included representatives of labor and business. After the war, Wilson appointed him as a member of the international labor legislation. He fought those who would erode the gains that labor had made during World War I. In 1894, Gompers became the editor of the official journal of the Federation. He maintained the journal until he died. He wrote many articles on labor for the publication. During all of his years as president of the Federation, Gompers had time for his family. He was family-oriented and believed in family loyalty. He had 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters. His wife died in 1920. A year later, he married Grace Gleaves Neuschuyler. Gompers was elected president for the last time at the 1924 convention. He had come to the convention knowing that he didn't have much time to live. He died on December 13, 1924. For almost 4 decades, Gompers had been the dominant figure in the American labor movement. He had broadened the horizons of the working man and his trade union. He was a pioneer in making the American labor movement free and strong. So it goes both ways. It seems like, and this is what really the point I try to want to underline in this little telecast that we're trying to make, is just that the Jewish people have been many on the fronts, and we talked about the military front. Now we're talking about the business front. And on one hand, they are the industrialists, and the other hand, that they are the labor people. So really, we cannot categorize Jewish people in any one area in America. We really have to look at the gamut of every kind of way, from the private to the general, to the corporate president, to the labor on the production line, which is, I think, the way we have to see it, because it's important. People classify and the Jewish people in one way or the other, and it's, in one sense, they're in America just like everybody else. That they, like I said, they're the rich and they're poor. They're the smart and the not so smart, and just about like everybody else is. And to characterize the Jewish people as one thing or another is really is not the proper way to look at it. Like I say, that they were the leaders in a lot of senses, and in many other senses they weren't. I am going to leave to a future to wet your tongue. Other side about the arts, which of course the Jewish people. We're talking about Gershwin and Molly Buchanan, El Jolson, and can go on and on. Really, that would take about 20 shows to talk about all the Jewish people in Hollywood, and really that's a major idea in itself. And in the sports heroes, which I don't know if we can say that many to Jewish sports hero, but we're going to leave that for another show also. But since we're talking about the World War I era, we're going to talk about the military again, as we said at the beginning, and since we moved up to that area in early 20th century, let's talk about World War I. The Jews' answer to the country's call to action. When the United States declared war against Germany in April 1917, a call went out for men to enlist in the military. Jews representing only 3.27% of the total population. It's probably a little less now, but so you see 3.25% of the population of America. Yet they made up of 5.73% of the country's armed forces. Again, interjecting my own thoughts into this article, that this is to dispel the notion that the Jewish people don't carry their military, if you say want to dues or their weight, even-handed. It's almost their double. They doubled their population in the military compared to what they were in the regular population. Congressman Julius Kahn of California, a Jew, was chairman of the House Military Affairs Committee, drew the first draft number from a glass bowl. At that time, he made a pledge that was picked up by the Jewish community. I desire to congratulate my co-religionists on the splendid showing they are making in the matter of serving our country in this war. Many of the boys who go down to the front will be wounded. Many of them will be killed. But Jews at all periods in the world's history have been ready to make the supreme sacrifice whenever the land that gives them shelter demands it. I know that I voice the sentiments of the overwhelming majority of the Jews in the United States when I say that we will do our share towards keeping Old Glory floating proudly in the sky so that it may continue to shelter under its folds the downtrodden and the oppressed of every land. Typical of the Jewish family's commitment to the war effort was one of Mrs. Gustav Jacobson of New York City. After the declaration of war, her oldest son, Gustav, enlisted in the army. Two more sons, Harry and Samuel, joined the Signal Corps. Another son, Simon, signed up with the gas contingent. Her fifth son, Benjamin, joined the 305th Artillery, and her sixth son, Jacob, enlisted in the aviation branch of the service. Her seventh son, Daniel, remained at home because he was only 15. Within the year, Mrs. Jacobson received word that Harry had been killed, Simon had been wounded, and that Jacob had been injured in an airplane crash. One day, the youngest son, Daniel, disappeared. A search for him proved futile. He was nowhere to be found. When armistice was declared, 5 of her 6 sons had returned home, 2 wounded and 1 killed. On a Sabbath eve, Daniel also returned home. He had changed his name and falsified his age so he could enlist and serve in the Marine Corps. The Jacobsons served their country without any hesitation, and the mother, Mrs. Jacobson, never complained. To offer 7 sons to the service of our country was a tremendous sacrifice. More than 250,000 Jews served in the armed forces in World War I. They received 1,135 decorations, including 3 Congressional Medal of Honor. There were more than 9,000 commissioned officers, including 2 generals and an admiral. Approximately 3,500 were killed and more than 12,000 wounded. The JWB, Jewish Wars Veterans, was organized in 1917 to help meet the war needs. It established 200 centers with more than 500 workers in the training camps and 57 centers overseas behind the trenches. It also helped with enlistment and with raising funds for the war. Once again, Jews responded to our country's call to help it repel its enemies, though we can remain free. So just again, in the 20th century, not only they were dealing with business, and like we told a few important stories about that, but also they took their weight in the military. And we're running out of time, and we really don't have the time to talk about all the great heroes of World War I. And like I said, really I knew that would take more than time allotted for us. But let's just conclude with, go back to inventors. And we know that this is another great field of America. the great country of innovation. So Emil Berliner, his legacy of innovation and invention. Emil Berliner's introduction to the flat disc to replace the cylinder in Thomas Edison's phonograph was the basis for the modern gramophone in 1887. The Victor Talking Machine Company acquired his patent and began to mass produce this new form of entertainment. Berliner was born in Wolfenbüttel, Germany in 1851. He immigrated to the United States in 1870 and worked as a salesman in New York and then in Washington, D.C. He became interested in electricity and in 1876 began experimenting with Bell's newly invented telephone. He invented the loose contact telephone transmitter and the use of an induction coil. This invention made it practical for the first time to use the telephone for long-distance calls. The Bell Telephone Company bought his invention and appointed him Chief Electrical Instruments Inspector of the company. He was with the company for a number of years and continued his experiments with electricity. Berliner became interested in aviation and engaged in many experiments which led to his introduction of the use of a revolving light engine. His attention focused on the helicopter. Between 1919 and 1926, he built 3 helicopters, which he tested in flight himself. Berliner was also involved in the fields of hygiene and health. In 1890, he organized and founded the Society for the Prevention of Sickness. He also organized in 1907 the first milk conference in Washington, D.C. for the pasteurization of milk and the improvement of its quality. He was very active in the fight against the spread of tuberculosis, and he wrote many articles on hygiene and preventive medicine. In 1899, Berliner wrote a book, Conclusions, that speaks of his agnostic ideas on religion and philosophy. At the end of his life, he supported the rebuilding of Palestine and was very active on behalf of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He died in 1929. His son Henry Adler Berliner was an engineer who worked with his father on the pioneering experiments with the helicopter. He was president of Berliner Aircraft Incorporated in Washington, D.C. from 1930 to 1954. In World War II, Henry was the chief of warplanes for the 8th Air Force and lost an arm in combat. Emil Berliner, through his innovations and inventions, left a legacy to America which his son continued with distinction and honor. Well, one more field that we needed to talk about was engineering and science. We'll talk about the great scientists, of course, Albert Einstein and the like. And but nevertheless, again, just it's very interesting to talk about just the different. We call them the Jewish heroes because they gave the Jewish people a good name. Immigrants from many different cultures had a hard time. The Irish, for example. People in America, unfortunately, didn't like the new immigrants. They were different. They talked a different language. They had different habits and different customs. So therefore, it was important for these new Americans to make the proving ground for America that say, yes, we are a people, we are a good people, and we're ready to help out America, and we're ready to help it thrive and do the better, whatever we can to help out America. And exactly why we call them the heroes, because in certain senses they really did do that. We talked about the business organizations, we talked about the labor, and we talked about the culture. And in many ways it was hard for new people to get its roots in a new land, but to these Jewish heroes that we talked about today, they did a good job and to give a good name to the entire Jewish people. Thank you very much.